I'm so interested by these numbers because share price is big movement after hours because it was a beat. We've got to remember, yes, they're beating on their earnings per share, they're beating on their revenue, they're giving us a bigger dividend and share buybacks, but these are still falling revenues, falling earnings per share, falling iPhone sales.
Sorry, it sounds like another boring quarter for Apple. No, I mean, I think, they continue, right? It's sort of like it's the same news every quarter. No, but, more seriously, I think the things that you can look to that are very strong is their installed base continues to grow, service revenue continues to grow, and so it's still a very strong story for Apple, despite all that.
Okay, so talk to us about the real strength. Is it all about the fact that services really is starting to grow? They call it a record quarter in terms of the services number, 11.5 billion.
Yeah, so I think, we'd expect to continue to see record quarters. And I think also, while the hardware business is still the core of Apple, a lot of the upward growth is still going to have to come from services. There isn't a next IT device. There isn't the smartwatch or the HomePod or something else that I have to have. So we're still to a large extent relying on the smartphone and smartphone upgrades, but then a lot of the growth is going to come from services. And I think that's where you're going to see more revenue per consumer as we look forward.
And they're talking of their installed base being, 1.4 billion users. I mean, is this enough? Do we worry in any way that that base might erode when we have such competition in the high-end device area, such as Samsung, such as Google's Pixel, such as Huawei, for example? Or do you think that they are so integrated that they keep that user base and the services really does then the heavy lifting?
Yeah, so I do believe that Apple tends to have a very loyal base of consumers. And I think, what's difficult here is you can't parse out that 1.4 billion. So as a consumer, as Julie, how many devices do I own versus how many new customers are they bringing into the Apple ecosystem? Because certainly the value of the services and the value of the devices goes up, the more devices that I own. And so both of those numbers need to continue to grow for Apple.
Okay. Some of the interest, of course, from this results was going to be focused on China because they tried to a certain extent, blame all of their problems on China, particularly the falling iPhone sales. Once again, China is a weak point. We're seeing down about 22%, I think, in terms of year-over-year sales. How much of a worry is it that China seems to be not quite the growth focus it had been?
So I think it's always, it's somewhat of a concern because it's the largest market in the world. Certainly there's a very strong competition from the local players in the Chinese market. But bigger picture, when we look at where new smartphone sales are coming from, they're going to come from economies like China and India and Indonesia and Nigeria and other large companies. And it's going to be harder for Apple to compete at their price points versus some of the local players and some of those in the Android market. So it's always going to be a tough road there.
And what about, Julie, as much as it's not potentially the fundamentals at play here, but we do look at them giving more cash back to the investor base. They're doing more share buybacks, bigger dividends, but they still got an enormous cash pile. How do you want to see that put to work?
Yeah, so not being a financial, advisor or an analyst, I probably am not the right person to say how they should put that to work. But I think, if they had better product ideas. And one of the other things I would say, right, because the next thing would be the services. There's only so much money that you can put at services because really there's a lot of dependency both on developers to create services on top of the platform. And there's a lot of runway for developers here to go. And then they're also very dependent upon their ecosystem partners, like signing up more partners within the payment ecosystem, getting more content. And so it's not as if they can just throw more money at services and magically make that number grow. They're so dependent on their partners to do that, unless they make some very different decisions about content and so forth.
You're right. And it's interesting, we're hearing from Tim Cook on the call at the moment. In our T-Live blog, which is a Bloomberg offering that shows all the latest news coming out of the call, Mark Gurman reporting that Cook is out with the superlatives, calling the iPad quarter was a blockbuster and praising the Apple Watch. But notably, he's saying the company's culture is that of flexibility, adaptability, creativity, and long-term thinking. Is Apple, at its very core, adaptable enough, flexible enough to decide it's a services company over and above a hardware company?
So I would say, given their track record to date, I would say the answer is yes. I think they're also in a position that, you could say is similar to some of the other large hardware manufacturers. And if you would compare them to some of their largest competitors, I would even argue that they're further ahead in the services space for a company that's still generating the vast majority of their revenue from hardware.